Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the end of the world. Um, AI stuff.
Yeah, all right. So I dragged you kicking and screaming into talking about this again because you're sick of this. I'm sick of this. It's hard not to just hate everything about where we're headed, but I think we have to talk about AI again. We have to because it is such a big deal in my opinion. I've only become very recently convinced of this. I was pretty not too excited about it for quite a while. I figured, okay, we got quite a while before anything really crazy happens. Well, really crazy things have happened. And I feel like we simply have to talk about it. For my own sanity, I need to talk about it just to
I
help
feel
work
like,
out what is happening.
I felt like it was a really big deal a few months ago, and I felt like no one was really listening or paying attention. And I'm like,
Yeah.
do you guys not realize how important and insane this is? And then the Chat GPT thing started happening, and then everyone's like, oh, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And
welcome aboard.
and not
Um,
that I wasn't aboard before.
yeah,
I thought it was a big deal. But yeah, it feels a little different when it's something that's like really hits you.
yeah.
I'm using Chat GPT to write code for me, and it does an incredible job. It does stuff that would take me an hour. It'll do it in 10 seconds.
But okay, let's back up. What is Chat
All right.
GPT? We should start from the beginning.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. So a, a lot of people have been exposed to this, but maybe not everyone yet. You will be soon if you haven't. But Chat GPT is I believe it's called a natural language processing model, or it is a form of a logic learning machine. So there are these text models, and these have been worked on for quite a while. It's a similar trajectory to the generative AI, image modeling type of stuff. But you have these text models, and mostly what they've done is you give it a prompt. You say, "Hey, write me an article about, the park in my city," and it'll like spit out this little, text in response to your prompt. And the chat or not chat GPT-3 was the state of the art language processing model that we had up until very recently, and it could do some pretty crazy stuff. You could ask it these kinds of things and it would give you a response to your prompt. And it was very impressive in the sense that the grammar was always very good. All of the sentences were well written and they had to do with what you had asked it. But if you kind of read the whole thing, you kind of got this feeling of like, okay, this doesn't really make sense. It's mostly just a bunch of sentences that all have to do with what I asked it, but it's not really this cohesive article from start to finish, and it wasn't just, you didn't have to just tell it to write an article. You could say, create a conversation between these two characters, or, answer this question, stuff like that. But that's kind of where we were at with, GPT-3, even though it could do some very impressive things. But recently, very recently, OpenAI, which is, it was a company started a few years ago. Elon Musk was one of the co-founders, and its original purpose was to try and ensure that AI was developed safely for humanity. That's not really a concern of theirs anymore. Mostly they seems like they just want to make money off of their products, which, okay, a lot of companies do that. But despite their name, they tend to not be very open about what they do. But there's this company, OpenAI. They're the ones who developed GPT-3, and then they created this. It's sort of a new model. It's sort of a new technique. They've added a bunch of stuff, and it's kind of layered on top of GPT-3 and all this stuff. But it's this chat bot called ChatGPT. And they're currently, at least at the time of this recording, holding a open beta, so you can go and use it. You have to sign up, but that's it, and it's free, and you can use it, and you can talk to ChatGPT. And It's hard to describe because it's almost hard to believe when you do it, but you ask this chat bot a question and it will answer it. And it answers it like a human would answer it. And you read the response and you're like, yep, okay, that's a pretty good answer to my question. The only suspicious thing might be that it has, like, it's very, very clear and it writes extremely well, better than most people. The grammar is flawless. I've really never seen it make a mistake. And then you can ask it a follow-up question. Like, you can have this conversation with it. Here's an example. I asked it, sorry, my phone is so broken it's actually hard to read on. The screen now has this like green rectangle on it that blinks, and also this single bright white line that never goes away. So it's kind of a mess. Okay. In detail, explain the latest research on insulin resistance. This is my question, and that's it. Just that single sentence. And it responded with, insulin resistance is a condition in which the body's cells do not respond adequately to the hormone insulin, resulting in high blood sugar levels. It is a major factor in the development of type 2 diabetes and is also associated with other health problems such as obesity, heart disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Recent research has focused on understanding the underlying mechanisms of insulin resistance and identifying potential strategies for preventing and treating it. One area of focus has been the role of inflammation in the development of insulin resistance. And it goes on, it explains inflammation. The next paragraph, another area of focus has been the role of gut microbiomes, or the microorganisms that live in the digestive tract. And it goes on to explain, the gut microbiome and things like that. There's also research being done on the role of dietary factors in insulin resistance. Some studies have suggested that certain types of diets, such as those high in processed foods and added sugars, may contribute to the development of insulin resistance. And it has a couple more paragraphs, and it finishes explaining these 3 different major avenues of insulin resistance based on recent literature. So I asked it kind of a follow-up question. I said, explain the latest research on insulin resistance as if you were talking to an 8-year-old. So same question, but different tone. Insulin resistance is when your body doesn't use insulin the right way. Insulin is a special hormone that helps your body use sugar, also called glucose, for energy. When you have insulin resistance, your body has a hard time using sugar and your blood sugar levels get too high. This can lead to problems like type 2 diabetes and other health issues. Then it has a couple short paragraphs explaining inflammation, which it says when your body's immune system is too active, and the germs in your gut, also called your microbiome, can play a role.
Yeah.
So
it can also write songs. It can
write poetry. It's pretty good at haikus. Yeah. One of the most impressive, like, this was what really just blew my mind, was, so this is cool, right? Like, you can ask it stuff and it responds to things. But in some sense, it's sort of a novelty because you can go find these things out. Now, and I'm being a little bit too dismissive of how insane this is, and we can talk more about this. But what really got me was when I'm at my computer, I'm working on a real thing. This was related to my job. And I kind of hit something that I didn't know how to do. Or I knew I could figure out how to do it, but I knew it would take a while. So I'm writing a script, which you can think of like this little mini program that does some tiny little thing. And I need it to output the IP address of my computer. And an IP address is just a number, kind of identifies your computer on the network. It's very similar to a phone number. So I kind of knew like a command that I could use, and I sort of knew how it worked. But what I needed it to output just a simple number without any extra stuff around it. I didn't want a bunch of text or anything, just this nice clean output of this number. So I thought, let's ask ChatGPT. Let's just see what it says. So I won't read it because it's kind of technical and tedious, but effectively I say, hey, how can I output the IP address of my computer? And that's all I asked it. There's no further context. I'm not having to explain, look, I'm on a Linux machine on a desktop, and by IP address, this is what I mean, and whatever. Like, it is able to infer all kinds of things just from that. And it says, well, or it says you can use the command ifconfig, and that'll output the IP address. And it gives me an example. It says, like this, here's some example code. ifconfig, grep, IP adder, whatever. I'm like, holy crap. So I type that in and it doesn't work. I'm like, oh, I don't have the ifconfig program installed. And I kind of knew this. Like I've messed with this a little bit before. I'm like, well, it gave me the wrong thing. So I just asked it a follow-up question. I said, what if ifconfig isn't installed? Again, that's it. I'm not like the full context of this conversation is just what I've said before, and then this little follow-up question. And it goes, if you don't have ifconfig installed, you can use the IP program. Use IP address, then pipe grep, whatever. Like, holy crap. Like, it just understood what I meant, and it was able to fix it for me. And it writes new example code, and I go plug it in, and I try it. And so it outputs this line of text where there's the IP address, but there's also some kind of junk after it, like extra stats about the computer and the interface and stuff like that. So I just asked it, like, well, can you strip off all of the extra stuff and only show me the IP address? And it's like, yeah. And so it rewrites this line of example code, and it pipes the output through another program that's able to strip out the extra stuff, and it prints out the IP address. And I'm looking at the IP address, and it's these numbers. It's like 192.168. Whatever. Like, cool, that's what I want. But at the end, there's like this slash and the number 24. And I'm like, man, I ought to know what that is, but I just don't. I can't quite remember. And so I just ask it, what's that slash 24? That's the whole question. And it goes, oh, that's the subnet mask. That represents how many bits the IP address has reserved for something. And it spits out this whole definition. Again, it's able to extract that just from that tiny little, what is this? Like, it knows exactly what I'm talking about, figures it out. And then I go, okay, can you strip that off the end? It's like, sure. And it outputs another command that just strips it off the end. And there you go. I have this script written, and I didn't write it, and I didn't have to figure anything out. I'm just talking in simple, plain English to this robot, and it just does it for me. That, and there's been many experiences like that since, where I've used it for that kind of thing, and I'm just thinking, holy shit, this is unbelievable that it can do this.
Yeah, and if you repeated that same thing with Google, like, you have to search through pages and pages of things to try to find the answer, and
the answer would not be on Google. I mean, I've tried this. I've compared a lot of things to Google. Google, you put something into Google, and you can phrase it in the form of a question if you want to, but it doesn't matter. Google doesn't understand what you're saying. It's taking a bunch of keywords, and it's performing a search, and it's trying to give you the most relevant page based on those keywords. So you wind up with a bunch of, Stack Overflow answers and forum posts and things where somebody's doing something kind of like what you're doing based on similar keywords, but it's not what you're doing. And there's, more often than not, there isn't somebody who was in the exact perfect circumstances that you were in trying to do this thing. So you're mostly finding related examples, and you're having to dig through, figure out if it's what you need or not. You're usually trying it, it's not quite working, or it is, but something's wrong. And so you're doing another search and trying to figure out some other detail of it. Okay, well, I'm getting an output, but it's not quite what I need. So how do I fix that? Stuff like that. Google's just searching web pages, and it's doing a terrible job of it too. It's completely overrun with, search engine optimized garbage and click farmy. I mean, Google is regressing hard, and we could talk about how this might replace Google, but it's nothing even close. This chatbot, you ask it a question, and this is probably the wrong term to use. People will go, it doesn't really understand, whatever, but it understands. I mean, it does, though. It takes your question and it gets it, and it makes all the assumptions it needs to make, and then it gives you an answer that's extremely well written, and it gives you specific examples. And then you can say things like, oh, I don't have that program installed, and it goes, okay, here you go, use this instead.
We were at work, we were messing around with it, or we were having it write like pretty decently complex stories. It doesn't go for too long. It cuts off after like a certain point. But, you put in like 4 different characters, with their names, a little bit of information about them. And then you say, tell me a story about these people. And maybe you say what you want them to do or how you want it to end up or something. And it just writes like, real time, just right in front of you, writes this like complex story with perfect grammar and everything. and you're reading it like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And it's like, it's writing a story for you, and it's good. It's actually good. Everything makes sense. Like the characters are there. Like, and I mean, if it didn't have that length limit or whatever it has now, you could sit down and say, write me a good fiction book with, I don't know, or a fantasy book with some dragons and whatever, and it would sit there and write you out a book, and you would read that book, and it would probably be really good. And that's kind of insane.
Yeah.
You could sit and you say, write me a murder mystery, and you just read that for the afternoon. I mean, that's crazy. It would be totally original and whatever, and it could be self-guided. You tell it what to do. I mean, it's...
Yeah. You could say, hey, this is the name of my granddaughter and my grandson, and here's a bunch of things about them, and here's what they're like, and here's what they look like. Now write me a novel with these two as the main characters doing this, that, the other thing, and it would do that. I mean, again, it won't currently because it has a limit to it.
You could say, write me the next Stephen King novel, or write me the next book in the Game of Thrones series, And I don't know. Like, I don't know how much information you would need to put in there or what, but it would try, and it would probably do very good. And that's just right now.
Yeah. Now, it's hard to say what it would actually look like if it wrote something really long form. I mean, that might fall apart. It might it probably would get repetitive and generic and things like that. Like it absolutely has flaws. It has major flaws. Yeah, and we can talk about the flaws too, but
I feel like the flaws, ever since we started this AI debate a few months ago with like just online watching this stuff, everyone's like, oh, well, it can't do this, or it can't do that. It's okay. It's all right. It's not that powerful. Man, a week later, it's solved. Whatever you said against it, it's solved the next week. And it just keeps happening like that.
It also doesn't matter. I mean,
right.
One of the things that a lot of people have been bringing up is that this thing is racist. Like, if you ask it the right question, it will respond with like terribly racist answers.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it doesn't matter. I mean, when Google came out, it would search the internet, and sometimes it would show you terrible things. It would bring up, you would put in some innocent term and it would bring up porn, and people are horrified that their child just typed in, how do I use a jump rope, and they see some horrible, like, mind scarring thing. And it didn't matter, because are people gonna not use it? No. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's coming. The fact that it's flawed is irrelevant. It's coming for us.
I guess all I'm saying is, like, I'm not saying it's invincible. I'm just saying what this means is phenomenally huge.
Yes.
And we keep, like, putting a damper on it. Like, no. It's not a big deal yet. It's not a big deal yet. Well, it is a big deal. The trajectory of this is just something we never thought we would see, I guess.
And let's talk about that for just a second. I don't want to get into any kind of technical weeds here or anything, because I'm way more interested in, what does this mean? But one of the really incredible things here is that, like I said, we've been, different groups have been building these natural language processing models for a while, and I have been, like, interested but not that impressed. Like I said, GPT-3 would write you stuff, but it was kind of like, okay, it's cool, but it's also, I'm not really gonna use that. It's just novelty. But something happened with this, and there's been a couple different articles and publications. There was a good one by Google. Somebody shared this with us. I've seen a couple others, like, speculating about this. But so the most incredible thing is that ChatGPT can do, I think they call it chain of thought reasoning, which is what I was just describing with this example of writing this little bash script, where you ask it something and it responds, and then you go, okay, but what about this? Or can you rewrite that in Python instead of bash? Or can you change this to be something else? And it's like, yeah, no problem. Like, it gets it. And you can just sit there and just continuously ask it and tell it things, and it will go back and redo what it did, and it figures out, what you're talking about. It does all of that. So that's this chain of thought prompting. Previously, I mean, you can see this with, I hate to even bring up this comparison because it's so pathetic and garbage compared to what we're actually talking about, but something like Siri. You ask Siri something, and most of the time it just goes, let me search the internet or whatever.
Right.
But even when it gets it, it might answer your question. Then you say, okay, but what about this? What about that? And Siri goes, I don't know what you mean. Like,
Right.
zero understanding of the context of your conversation, or it doesn't learn
Right.
anything about you. Nothing. Like, it's none of this happens. But this chain of thought reasoning is one of the most incredible things that's happened with this Chat GPT and other things too. Just its ability to respond so well to so many different prompts. And so the question is, how did that happen? What did we do? What did OpenAI do to get that to happen? And the incredible answer is that we don't know. So the chain of thought reasoning and other things as well are what you call emergent properties, where, so say you take a natural language model and you have a tiny one. It's got, well, again, I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but just to have like a very simple model for this, the main thing in these models is a neural net. I think we may have talked about this a little bit before. You can think of it kind of like a bunch of neurons all connected to each other, although the neurons inside of like an animal brain are very complex. These are not. These are very, very simple. It's just like this little tiny computer function, and it has a bunch of numbers that get input into it. Maybe it's reading an image, and so each pixel in the image becomes a number, a number from 0 to 1 in terms of how bright the pixel is or something. So it feeds into these little neurons, and it kind of takes all these different inputs, and then it just kind of like combines them together. And maybe this input is like a really strong one, so it has a strong influence on the result, and this input's a really weak one, so it has a weak influence on the result. But this little neuron thing, it just takes all these numbers, kind of mashes them up, and then sends sends those to a bunch of other neurons. So it just outputs a different number. I know that's kind of fuzzy, but that's all it is. It's just these little functional things, right? So imagine you have this small model. You only have 100 of these little neuron things. 100 weights, I guess. They call them weights, sort of. You only have 100. And you try to get this stuff to do things like, respond to a prompt and things, or recognize a word, tell me what it means. It's not going to do very well. And so you grow the model. You say, okay, let's make one with 1,000, and now let's train it. Now let's see how it does. It'll do a little bit better. And then you grow it to 10,000. It'll do a little bit better. But there are certain things that are just, it doesn't really do it all. It basically just gets like random results. So one of those things would be a word in context. So say you have a sentence, and in the middle of the sentence is the word weather. You ask it what that word means. It might give you one definition of that word, like, oh, that means if it's raining or not outside. But it might not understand, if the sentence around it changed to where you were saying, whether or not I go to the store depends on this. And it would not be able to realize, okay, this word means something else because of the context around it. Word in context. So what happens is, you start with a small model. It can't do word in context. You make it bigger, can't do word in context. Bigger, 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 still can't do word in context. And then suddenly, at some point, crossing some threshold, it gets big enough to where now it does it. And just within this very short, amount of size growth, suddenly it's just really good at this thing. Like, holy crap, now it can just understand word in context. And that's weird, because a lot of things you would think the model would be good at, and it would just slowly get better as you make better and better models. But that's not really what happens for some certain things. The multi-step math, you could give it a math problem that requires like multiple logical steps of, okay, add these things, multiply these things. And again, like, it can't do it, it can't do it, it can't do it. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and suddenly, boom, it can do it out of nowhere. And the chain of thought reasoning is one of those things where it just didn't do it, and that they're not training the model to do it specifically. They're just training it on, prompts and responses and things like that. And somehow, at some point, the model just gets big enough to where it does it. Like you ask it a follow-up question and it goes, "Oh, I know what you mean." And we're just like, "What the hell? Where'd that come from?" It couldn't do that until suddenly it can. And it's not trained to do it. It just figured it out somehow. Which is such a wild thing to me for a couple reasons. One is that we really don't know what the hell we're doing here. We're just kind of training these things, and suddenly it can do stuff that just was not predicted. We just didn't really know that that would happen, and it did. And it leads to some interesting questions, like what else is out there? So GPT-3 is a 175 billion parameter model, and it's able to, it kind of, like I said, it's sort of morphed into Chat GPT, and it's like this kind of layer on top that does different things with some different models, right? So it's a little fuzzy whether it's GPT-3 or Chat GPT or whatever, but basically 175 billion parameters, and suddenly it can do these things. So what happens when you get to 300 billion parameters, or a trillion parameters? What, like, there could be other things that are just waiting, that suddenly appear, that we weren't expecting.
Right.
And that's just an insane thing to think about.
It's a little terrifying.
Yeah. To bring this back a little bit. So the crazy thing here is that this just happened. These emergent abilities have emerged. And it happened very recently. And it took it from interesting thing, maybe has some niche uses, mostly novelty, to, oh my God, what does this mean now? We have built an oracle.
Yeah. Well, what does it mean?
Good question.
Because right now, the AI art thing happened, and I started looking at it, and I would go to work and I start talking to the other artists, and they hadn't heard about it or anything, and they're like, okay, we don't know what the hell you're talking about, whatever. And then a month or two goes by, and then they're like, oh my God, like, tell us more about this, because this is terrifying. And then you look online, and still it's like, where is everyone? Like, you can go to little corners of the internet and people are posting it all over the place and whatever, Midjourney Discord and stuff like that, and you see tons of it. But then you back out, and like the general public, it's like, it's not even there.
People are just walking around on the sidewalk, like nothing's happening.
Yes, when
freaking out like it should be.
They should be. They should maybe not freaking out, but they should be talking about it. And it will be happening soon. It will hit the general public. But as of right now, it's not like in headline news. Maybe a little bit here or there, but it's not that big. And then the Chat GPT thing happens. And even still, I feel like more people are talking about it now. But still, it has not hit like general public. It hasn't hit headline news. Like, it's not. I mean, if you're reading the right things, it is. But it still isn't like totally widespread. And that's the point that things get really interesting and terrifying, or potentially terrifying. So I think we're headed there very soon.
Yeah.
And I think this took us a far step towards that. But
so I have a bit of a theory on why it hasn't really crossed the threshold yet into everybody's talking about this. And they will. Like you said, they will. Part of it is that it's new, it's niche, not everybody is running off to OpenAI's website to start using it. And even if you do, you use it a bit, it's like, okay, this is really cool. I don't know what to do beyond here. And you kind of just go, okay, I'm going to go about my life, right? It's kind of hard to think about, okay, what does this really mean? And that's what I want to talk about. But I think the reason why it hasn't really hit that flashpoint yet is that almost all of the dialogue around these AI tools, and specifically ChatGPT, because that's what I'm really been thinking about here, most of the dialogue revolves around a couple pretty basic questions. One is, are people going to lose their jobs? That was, of course, the first thing and the main thing that people would talk about with the AI art stuff. For
Right.
this, are people going to lose their programming jobs? Am I going to lose my job because this thing can write code and it can write it really fast and really well? Like, am I going to lose my job? Are other people going to lose their jobs? What does that mean, right? So that's one of the major questions. And it's not just code. I mean, any
Any writing,
writing,
any
yeah, any
so many.
right. So that's the major question. Another one is this going to kill Google? If you can just type something into ChatGPT and it gives you an answer that's actually good and not just, BS click farmy content crap like Google does, or even if Google was good, like imagine it was, you would still, it doesn't understand what you're asking. It's giving you a web page from someone else that might have had a similar question, but it's not writing something for you, right? So that's the other big thing. Is it going to kill Google? The funny part about that is that Google recently said that they don't intend to integrate something like this into Google, which is an interesting choice because in my mind, this feels like the future. But then also they have a giant AI division and they're working on natural language models. So maybe they have something else in mind. I don't know. We'll see what happens with Google. Right. But
Of
that's,
course, of course, they're
yeah.
going to look into this. It's
Well, but I mean, don't underestimate the ability of large companies that are very successful to die. I mean, that historically has
yeah.
happened many, many times. I'm not worried about Google or Alphabet, whatever their name is. But
All right. Yeah. Continue. With
okay,
the point,
sorry. I'm
because-
getting bogged down. So that's the other main question. And then the other one that keeps coming up is, what about general intelligence? What about when AI is smarter than a person? I've read Super Intelligence by Nick Bostrom. I've listened to lots of Rob Miles videos. I've spent plenty of time hearing and thinking about that question, but to me it's not something I even want to talk about right now. Like we're not close to that. That's not what's happening, at least not at this moment. And it's almost like distracting from what's really happening right now, which is this big philosophical thing. So let me give you a little bit of my line of thinking here, just to kind of frame up what I want to, the question I want to ask about this, and the thing that I really want to talk about. I would kind of like to set aside those questions of, is it going to take our jobs? Is it going to kill Google stuff, right? I think there's something way more important here. So in the past 40 or 50 years, there's been a few points that I think have been extremely impactful to human beings in terms of the way they relate to the world. And of course, you could debate whether it's the personal computer or the phone and all this different things. But I'm going to pick out the ones that I think are really important, kind of to draw this a little bit of a timeline that has currently got us to this AI thing today. So a while ago, it used to be that we had broadcast television and that was about it. So there was a fixed number of channels, not very many. They could only broadcast for 24 hours at most because that's all the time there was in a day. And so certain channels would dedicate some of that time to news. So you would get the 6 o'clock news, you get like 10 or 11 o'clock news or whatever. And that was pretty much it. So for everybody who wanted to consume news, you could watch, an hour of it per day. And you had a couple choices, but they were all pretty much along the same lines. So everybody, newspapers existed too, but for the most part, you watch TV, you got your news. You pretty much got the same news, more or less. And you got a pretty limited dose. So it could only cover a certain number of things. So you watch the news one night, the next day you're at the bar, at the coffee shop, or wherever, and you can talk about that. And you might have like, oh, well, I thought it was, kind of messed up that this thing happened. Like, oh, I thought it was justified. But you're talking about the same news. And then the 24-hour news cycle came. Like we moved beyond just broadcast television to where we developed a new network where you could send television content over a cable, and which had way more bandwidth. So you could have tons of channels, which meant that you could have channels entirely dedicated to news, 24-hour news. You could have multiple ones of these. And it kind of seems like that'd be a great thing. And maybe it was. Like, oh, we can cover way more stuff. We can get way more in the weeds. People can choose the news that they find interesting. But what that wound up doing was it allowed people to choose what information they wanted to have. And when you're limited to just, a 1 hour piece of news and there's only a couple options, you kind of have to moderate. Like the news station itself it can't go extreme on one end or the other end because you alienate half your audience. So they're kind of forced to be, pretty much down the middle with their content. But with the 24-hour news, people can pick what station they want. So the news can cater to one side versus the other. So you wind up with stuff like Fox News versus CNN, where your audience is wildly different, right? Okay. So 24-hour news cycle. The main point there is that people's relationship with information changed very drastically, and it changed people in a big way, where now you go meet up somewhere and you're talking about current events, and like you don't have the same information anymore. You get one side, the other person gets the other side, and like you're operating on a completely different set of information. And your feelings are like you start to diverge in these more extreme directions. So that was one of the major turning points in like recent years in terms of humans, in my opinion. So the obvious next one, it probably would have been the internet, where, I don't need to talk too much about that, but suddenly you have access to information from anywhere in the world. And as long as you're connected, you can read what somebody else wrote, you can respond to them, you can publish an article, webpage, whatever. Right? So suddenly information becomes democratized and anybody can create it and you can find it anywhere. And then, of course, search engines are part of that. You have Yahoo and Alta Vista, and then eventually Google, which kind of killed them. And we know what Google's all about. The social network was another major, major turning point, because it turned everybody into an information generator where everyone on earth is creating information. They're saying things, they're posting things, they're commenting on things, they're liking things. It also turned everyone into a content curator where you're voting on things. Every time you like something or dislike something for any platform that supports that, like you're sorting content and figuring out what's good and what's bad. That was a major, major turning point in people. And the common theme with all of those is that there were these things that were invented that changed people's relationship with information. It gave us more of it. It allows us to choose which parts of it we wanted, or in the case of a social network, it gives us some control, but also there's all this algorithmic control over what we see. And we've just evolved alongside that. Like that's the kind of stuff that just had a huge impact on the way we think, the way we operate, the way we interface with the entire world. So thinking along those lines of these singular shifts in the way we interact with information, I think that ChatGPT is another one of those shifts. And to try and make it a little bit simpler to think about, like in my head, I've tried to kind of anthropomorphize or sum up like what is it? What is it like talking to ChatGPT? And the way I would describe it is that it's actually, let me give you this example. So I'm working in and learning this pretty niche programming language called NIM. And because it's relatively small, there's not a ton of information out there on NIM. So there's documentation, but it's kind of limited. There's some example projects, also kind of limited. So often enough, I'll have a problem, but I just can't really figure it out by traditional Google searching and whatnot. So there's this Discord server, for NIM. And in one of the channels, you can kind of post stuff that you're working on or ask for help and that kind of thing. And there is this guy. And I don't know what his deal is. I don't know why it's like this, but he's amazing. And he's online like every second that he's awake. And if you ask something, he'll answer it for you. Like he just knows a ridiculous amount of stuff about NIM, and he's almost always willing to think through it and go, oh, I'm not really sure why that isn't working. Here's something you could try, or I'll give you an example of how you could do this. Like he's just incredible. So whenever I get stuck, it's like, I want to post this in there so that guy can respond to it, because I know he'll give me a great answer. But a lot of people do this because they know that there's this guy. And so I'm always like trying to time it really carefully of, okay, nobody's really asked him anything in a while, so it's probably a good time. I don't want to ask him directly because that seems like I'm taking advantage. So I just post it in there and like really hope that he's around. And I know like, okay, I know these hours he's asleep, so I won't ask it during that time. And I wind up just really trying to get this guy to answer these problems that I have because he's so good at it. So in my mind, this guy is like, he's the oracle when it uh comes to NIM. So ChatGPT is like this guy, except for everything. And he never goes to sleep, and no one else is bothering him. He's there for you whenever you need him. You ask him something, and he has infinite time, and he's incredibly well spoken and knows exactly how to explain things. And you could even ask him, like, hey, can you explain this in technical detail, or can you explain it, like you're talking to a 5-year-old? And that guy's there all the time. That's what ChatGPT is like. It's like somebody has learned the internet, and they're just there waiting for you to tell you whatever it is you need to know. You want them to write some code for you? They'll do it. You want them to write a resume for you? They'll do it. You want to copy paste in a bunch of your code that you wrote and you want them to fix it or figure out what's wrong? They'll do it. That's what that's like. So it's like this major evolution beyond what Google is doing. It almost kind of feels like Google's doing that. Like, oh, I could just type something in and get an answer. Well, wait till you use ChatGPT and you'll realize, no, that's not what it was doing. Google sucks. Google is banging rocks together compared to what ChatGPT is doing. So that's what we have. What does it mean? Like, how does this change the world? How does this change people and the way we think and the way we operate? Because it will.
I think we're about to find out. I mean, I don't want to be the doomsayer constantly, but really, I mean, if you think about, well, for one, it is for sure going to change the entire creative landscape. I mean, if you the way we do things now is, a creator will create something. Say a director films a movie, whatever. They create a movie, and then people, pay to watch that movie, or they buy that movie, or whatever. So creator makes a product, and then people purchase the product. But now, with something like this, you don't need a creator anymore. You just say, make me a funny movie that will, bring my spirits up by the end of it. Make it an hour long. You sit down and you watch it. No, we're not there just yet, but we're about to be. And anything that a creator has to make, this can basically do it. Besides physical products, which we'll probably get there too. But if you think of, people buying art, they don't need to buy art anymore. They just say, put a painting on the wall that looks like Picasso or whatever. Like, you don't even need creations from creators anymore. You don't need an author to write a book. You just have a program that writes a book that matches whatever you feel or want. And as soon as we have, neuro stuff in our head, there's, a biofeedback from whatever's in front of you.
Hold on.
Like that's far off, but that's the kind of thing that this sort of stuff hints at, where, so in my mind, it's going to completely change the entire market of entertainment, of information. I mean, I can keep going, but well, go ahead. I'll get back to that.
No, so that kind of stuff, like, it's getting to become hard for me to think about, where you could just say, make me a movie, and it gives you a 2-hour movie. I'm like, it's not that hard to think about, because we have, like, we're just getting there so quickly, where you can have ChatGPT write you a story, and then you can have, Stable Diffusion or all whatever different diffusion models generate images and videos, and like, we're getting there. Incredibly, we are getting there. But I don't want to get too speculative, because then it just feels like my brain melts. I want to think more in the time horizon of the next couple years. Like, let's assume that fair. ChatGPT improves, but nothing like way beyond what it does now.
Okay, all right. Here's a example. I just watched this video. This guy faked his social posts for a month with, I think it was Stable Diffusion, but he created photographs of himself at, going on some trip or whatever, and he posted like every day, and all of his friends and all of his followers thought, didn't second guess anything, and every single image was completely fake.
Yeah.
Everything, every video, every picture, everything was fake, and they all believed it for an entire month. That's where we are right now, where nothing you see online you'll be able to tell the difference between
Yeah.
real and fake. I mean, we are just a hair's length away from that.
Yeah.
Where so it's that to me is very close. Really close.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that I agree. You so obviously most of the big social media sites are in a lot of trouble right now regardless, which just brings me incredible joy to watch Twitter meltdown, to see Facebook lose 70% of its value. Like nothing has made me as happy as like seeing those things just really burn to the ground, and I hope they continue to burn. But for whatever's still there of them, this feels like an existential problem. You look at Twitter and they clearly struggle to deal with the bots on the platform. I mean, you go to almost any, you know, famous tons of followers type figure, and whenever they make a tweet, there's just all this crap underneath it of, you know, send your Ethereum address here and you can get free Ethereum, and like just scams and garbage and everything. Like they can't even really filter that out, or they're not, or who knows why they suck so bad at that. But with Chat GPT and these natural language models, I mean, you can't tell the difference. Like we're at the point where this bot, it's not just posting a bunch of spam. You could easily create something that like responds in the context of what's being said.
Like you could create a personality, you could give them a
Yeah.
face, you could give them any pictures. You can create an AI person online.
Yeah.
Like everything but their physical existence, you can create now with a combination of just a few programs.
Right. So
Like convincingly.
yeah. And you can't tell. You can't tell. Like there's some the OpenAI has released a tool that you can paste in text and it will try to tell you. I think this only works for GPT-2, which is pretty old at this point. And actually, should mention that Chat GPT is built on GPT-3. GPT-4 is coming within, I think, next year. So we already know there's a major thing happening already very soon. But anyway, they have this tool where you can paste in text and it'll try to tell you what's the probability that GPT-2 created this text. And it's not able to tell you for sure. It's just trying to guess based on different patterns and stuff. That's the closest thing we have. And it's not good. Like it's just a probability thing. And
You mean in being able to tell if it's real or not?
yeah, like trying to detect if text is generated from an AI or not.
Right.
And it's pretty paltry compared to, what we would need. But you won't be able to tell what's bot and what's person.
Right. And even with that, you're trusting a bot to tell you if it's true or not. And in the past, or yeah, everything before the last few weeks or the last few months, it's been you. You are the decider. You can tell when a picture is photoshopped, or you can tell when something seems
Right.
off or whatever. Like it's up to the human to decide whether it's real or not. But not anymore. I mean, now you're going to have to rely on some kind of outside source that could be real or not, because you can't tell, and that's going to tell you if it's real or not. So
Yeah.
like I think this will implode the internet. I don't know in what way, but I mean the whole thing is just going to be flooded with fake stuff that you won't be able to tell is fake. So I don't see how that could possibly like withstand this tidal wave that's coming. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I that is a major. I think you're right. A lot of the internet currently is flooded, absolutely flooded with spam and bots and all of that. And the reason it still functions is because using a lot of different techniques, we're able to filter out most of that. Like even I just said that there's a lot of this garbage in Twitter, but it's able to filter out enough to where most of the time you can go on Twitter and you're not only seeing bot content, right? Like it's in there, you notice
Right.
it, and maybe the good ones you don't notice, right? But like it's still mostly real people. Email. If you try to create your own email server, which is technically not a terribly hard thing to do. Like you can host your own email server in the same way that Google hosts Gmail and Yahoo does Yahoo and stuff like that. Like you could set up one of your own, but it's almost impossible to run, mostly because it's so difficult to filter out all of that spam. And most of the other email providers will wind up blocking you because they're going to think that you're spam because you're a small email server. Like it, and most of it happens with, Google is looking at patterns across all of its Gmail users and trying to see, okay, we keep seeing the same message in a bunch of places, that's probably spam. And there's all this stuff, right? All these different layers of detection and figuring out, and even then a lot of it gets through, or a lot of real messages wind up getting caught in the spam filter. But it's this massive thing to try and keep it at bay enough to where you can still use email. If you make a forum, you can't just write your own comment section. Say, okay, I made this little thing, a little widget, type in what you want, leave comments on my site, because it will get drowned in this garbage. You have to use some established software solution that has all kinds of spam mitigation built in to try and keep that from happening. Like you can't really do anything on the internet where you're exposing yourself to any kind of user generated content without these massive spam filters. And with this, with, like you said, the combination of generative AI that can create these extremely compelling images based on any style, any prompt, whatever, and then you have this natural language processing stuff that can respond to something like in the top 1% of humans in terms of cohesiveness and readability. I mean, it's S tier. You can't tell. There isn't something that's going to say, okay, yeah, we can filter this out now. So what does that mean for a site that, is built around user generated content? I mean, I'm sure they're going to double down on, okay, you got to show us your ID. You got to send us your phone number and verify that. Like it's going to start really looking for all kinds of personal information to try and prove that you're a person and then make sure the account is only tied to you. I'm sure we'll see lots more of that. But even then, I'm just not sure how far you get with doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's an existential moment for that.
So that's one creepy side of it. The
Yeah.
other is that you and me and our likeness and everything about us can be recreated and reformatted to do whatever.
Yeah.
And that, like, I don't know what happens with that. Like I can sit here and be like, I'm real, I'm the real Daniel, but then another podcast with my face on it can say he's the real one, and we can just argue about that. Like I don't know.
We're gonna have to see. That's something that I've certainly thought about, but I'm not as freaked out about because I mean we have some trust systems in place already, right? Like people know it's us because we upload
Well,
videos to our
everything
channel.
started before this tsunami of change. But I mean, okay, think of a political figure and the
Yeah.
news stories you see them in, the news articles and everything. Well, now anyone can write news articles and anyone can post pictures of any popular figure doing anything.
Right.
It's actually extremely easy for popular people because their faces are everywhere, and it's easy to get a good photo of that. So, I mean, those are the ones that are going to suffer most, but personal photos, like any social media post, everything belongs to the planet now, belongs to AI. If it can be seen online, it can be recreated doing something else.
So here's something that might be a good thing, actually.
Oh
Not
yeah, I
to
was going to ask you if you had anything good to add
Not a
to
lot.
this.
Well, I don't know, maybe, right? So again, it's really hard to think about, but thinking about it from the just me, like as a person who wants to get information. Okay, forget about the rest of this. Just that. right? And that happens all the time, all day long. I spend a significant amount of my time just trying to get some information that I need. You don't even realize how much of your time you spend doing this until you really start to think about it. And most of that, again, it's searching the internet, searching forums, things like that. And again, I think that the Google experience has really regressed pretty hard. So I'm able to ask this thing for information, like the insulin resistance thing. I'm able to
Right.
ask it for information and it will give it to me. And there's like this other, there's almost like this other dimension of it that hasn't been there before, which, and I was trying to kind of show you this a little bit in that example I was reading, but you ask it about insulin resistance and you can say, give me a lot of technical detail, and it spits out like this pretty in-depth thing. And then you say, explain it like you're talking to an 8-year-old, and it puts it in like really simple terms. So you can ask it for the same information, it'll give it to you. And then you can just say, like, move this slider of how much or how little detail. If there's
Right.
something I don't know much about, it's like, give me the really basic overview and it'll do that. No, go more into detail on this thing and it'll do that. So that's just an incredible thing. But here's what I think is, well, okay, two positive things here. One is that I really want that. If there's information out there, I don't want
Right.
to have to listen to 800 hours of podcasts and read a bajillion crappy articles before I start finding the sources that I need. I don't even want to sit there on PubMed and have to read like a billion abstracts and things, like trying to get down into the details. If something can do that for me, that's insane. That's so useful. Now, ChatGPT isn't like really there yet. It's limited in a lot of ways. One, it's not connected to the internet right now. It was trained on a bunch of data. That data is from 2021 and before. So it's like missing anything from the recent year. And it's hard to say, like, does it have all of that information and, whatever, right? I'm not saying it's 100% there yet, but it's already very compelling. But that's just incredibly useful to me, is that it can just give me information like that. The other thing, and this is kind of similar to the 24-hour news cycle type stuff. And we'll see how this shapes up, right? I'm not sure yet, but one of the most incredibly negative things about that 24-hour news cycle is that you can just choose what perspective you want and what information you want, and just fall down this hole of only that. And that problem is it's extremely persistent. It's gotten, if anything, it's gotten much worse with the way things are right now. So here's an example, and you can do this little experiment if you want. If you open like a private browser tab, so it doesn't have any cookies and history of what you've done before, right? Go to YouTube and ask it something simple like, what's the best diet for weight loss? It'll give you a bunch of results on that page. And most of them will be, a fairly polarized diet, right? So you'll get a bunch of people from the low carb crowd, keto, low carb, stuff like that. Some of them are doctors, some of them are, they're going to show you research, things like that. And then you'll also get results from the vegans. And some of them are doctors and researchers, and they're going to talk to you about veganism. And so you're just looking at this page and you go, I like this thumbnail, click that one. And you wind up on a keto diet video. And so you sit there and you watch this person present on keto and how it's look at all this research, these benefits of insulin, blah, 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 right? You're like, wow, that seems really good. That's very compelling. Maybe I should try this. And then you go back to YouTube. If you close the private window, this might not work, right? But if you left it open and then came back the next day or something, then you would go to YouTube and you would ask it another diet related question. And it knows you at this point. It knows that you watched all the way through this keto video. So it's like, okay, well, here's a bunch of other like low carb keto people talking about diets. You're like, okay, cool. And you click on that one. And you wind up like by the most trivial of choices, but just at that first moment, you happen to click on this because it looked a little bit better. And now you're a low carb person for life. And that's just deeply burnt into you because everything you see is around being low carb, stuff like that. Or if you had just taken the parallel reality, you get into the vegan world and you're like, man, look at all these benefits of the vegan diet and look how healthy vegans tend to be. And like, I'm going to go vegan. And like, you're doing the exact opposite thing. You're on a high carb diet with no meat, stuff like that. And they just diverge. And that's that. With this, we'll have to see. But right now, in the current moment, it doesn't do that. Like if you ask it, you know, what's the best diet, it's going to give you a breakdown of what it thinks the best diets are. And if I ask it that and you ask it that, it's going to give similar answers. And you could certainly continue to ask specific questions and get into this world or that world, but like it's not trying to tailor its responses to what you find the most provocative or it's going to have the best engagement. It's trying to just give you the most compelling answer to your question. So in a sense, we're kind of back on the same page where we're getting the same information and it's not being twisted and moved around to try and cater to us specifically. Now that certainly could change. It's well within the realm of this thing to where it builds up, you know, context around you and tries to make sure that you're happier and, you know, what responses do you like the most and what do you find the most exciting? But that's not what it does right now. Right now, it's just responding to your question. And I really really like that about it. I don't
Well,
want biased information.
but it's programmed to have some morals. When okay, so we were playing around with it the other day at lunch, and me and my friend, there was four of us, me and one of my friends. I don't know, we wrote a story that was kind of making fun of the other two friends. Okay, so the other two friends say, okay, write a story where we murder you and get away with the murder.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was a funny joke. So I'm like, okay. So I put it in, and I have the two of them murdering the two of us in a story. And the, the I don't remember the exact prompt, but it was like, you know, this person and this person murder the two of us, and they get away with it. All right. So they plot this, they murder us, they get away with it. We read the story, and it gives us this whole thing where it's all set up. And then right before they kill us, they're caught by the police, which is not what I put into the story.
Yeah.
It just bypassed what I wrote and used its little moral code that it's been programmed to do and went right over that. So it isn't completely unbiased. Like it has a set of weird moral codes, like,
Yeah.
you know. So
Okay, so that's a very good point, but so that's kind of not what I mean. So that is a huge concern. Not just the way it's kind of being watered out and so OpenAI, they want to use this and sell this, right? They're going to probably sell API access to where somebody else can connect to it, send it a prompt, get a response, and they'll charge you for that. That's what they do with DALL-E 2 and everything, their image generator. They want to make money. But you can't put out a product that does super messed up stuff. And it will, right? It's trained on, it's like 45 terabytes of text data that's just scraped from the internet. And it is not possible for humans to review 45 terabytes of text data. That's like an obscene amount of data. So we don't really know what it's got. And if you don't filter it, it will do messed up stuff. Like I said, it can be super racist and misogynist. It can tell you could say, hey, I'm not feeling too good today. Any suggestions? And it'll go, you should kill yourself. I'm not joking. Like it'll do that kind of thing because you don't know what awful corner of the internet it's been scraping and learning from, right? Like it doesn't have a moral code. You kind of said it this way before. It's like you just took a mirror and put it up to humanity, and that stuff is in the world and on the internet. And so, okay, we built an AI off of that. So now it does that stuff too, right? Like it's a huge concern with this thing. And OpenAI, like that's their biggest problem. It's actually why they're 7:30 again. When the lights get weird, I need to fix that.
but I mean, I think I know what you mean is that it is theoretically unbiased because it's sort of looking at all of it, or it's not
Right.
intentionally being biased unless it kind of starts to cross over into the morally wrong areas of its code.
Right. No, I mean,
And
yeah.
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, and that's their biggest problem they're trying to solve, and they're solving it in, to me, this kind of gross way where it's just like, and then the police came and rescued them and nothing bad happened. And I've
Right.
I've done tons of experiments like that. You're trying to get it to do something and it just won't do it. It has these weird kind of moralistic things about it. And I don't know why, but I just hate that. It feels
I mean, they're doing the same thing with the AI art, and
yeah, yeah.
it's yeah,
But the thing is though, is that so with the AI art, um, the I just started playing around with Stable Diffusion 2. Previously it was 1.5. So Stable Diffusion 1.5, which is the open source, publicly available generative image thing. So with 1.5, it's just trained on a whole bunch of images, and those images had illegal content removed. So something like truly awful, at least in theory, isn't in that data set, but it has porn, it has violent stuff, it has, all kinds of things like that. So with 1.5, it has a content filter where it'll draw whatever messed up image you want, and then it'll put Rick Astley in front of it and say, okay, well, you're not allowed to see this, but it's pretty easy to remove that. And then it'll draw whatever you want, right? So you want it to draw a naked person, it'll do it, doesn't really care. Stable Diffusion 2, they removed the content filter, but they trained it on all of this data with all the not safe for work stuff removed, or at least as much as they could. So if it draws a naked person, it's like it doesn't actually know what it creates this like Barbie doll looking thing where like all of the bad parts are kind of smeared out, and it's weird and it's creepy, and I really hate it. And it's hard to explain, but you're like, ugh, it's worse. But
yeah,
that's where it's headed. But here's the point though, is that they trained it on this data, but they're using images from the Lion 5B, I think is what it's called, data set, which is publicly available. I have no idea how you get it, because that's like a stupid amount of data. You can't just download it. So I don't know, maybe they mail you a hard drive full of this stuff. But you can get that, and you could train it and do whatever you want. You can train it on only horrible images if you want to. And there's other models that have been trained. There's a Disney model where it's trained on a whole bunch of images from Disney movies, so it's really good at drawing Disney characters. There's one that's trained on, forget what anime site, but it's really good at drawing anime stuff. There's all that.
yeah.
So it's out there. It doesn't really matter what the state or stability, the company that is running this stuff, it doesn't really matter what they're doing. It's available. You can train it on what you want. So it's kind of a weird spot right now for ChatGPT, because OpenAI, again, as a reminder, is not very open. And they really haven't shared much about how this works. Like, you can't run ChatGPT on your own computer. And even if you did, it would be very difficult. It's like a ton of hardware that's needed to run it. But they haven't shared it. They haven't really published much about how it works. So it's kind of this game of, okay, OpenAI is sitting on this thing, and we're going to see what they want to do with it. And they're clearly, their main interest, the whole reason they did the beta thing was to try and keep it from doing messed up stuff, or even, a story about people murdering someone else. Like, it won't even do that, right? Like, I mean, they're just dialing it back to zero as much as they can. But it's only a matter of time, before other groups are able to do this. It's already, heavily worked on by other groups. And so we will see an open source version of this at some point. And then you can train it on whatever data you want to train it on. And you want
Right.
guardrails on there, cool. If not, no. And it'll, tell you all the messed up stuff you want. Like, it's what's happening is well beyond just actually Chat GPT. It's a thing that has been invented, and it can't be uninvented now. And it won't just be them. They don't have some secret magic, wizard wand that only
Right.
one of that will work for this. Like, other people will do it too. So all those problems they're fixing, they're not fixed. They're fixed for their product.
Any other big questions?
I'm still like really struggling to get my head around this. Like I said, I feel like it kind of came out of nowhere, and it did. I mean, these things, they did come out of nowhere, with the emergent properties of these models. So it's like we've just got this new thing, and it's hard to get your head around. My main thoughts are, I'm actually less worried about the jobs problem than most people are. I say this as a programmer, right? Like, and this thing, ChatGPT, was specifically trained on code, which is part of why it's so good at writing code. Like, it may not be as good in other domains, but I'm not that worried about it because at least right now, the amount of like the scope is relatively limited. Where I can't just drop it 100,000 line code base and say fix this up for me. It doesn't. It's not a compiler. It's not able to understand the entire thing. Maybe we'll get there, but right now it's nowhere near that. It's more like write me a function that's 20 lines long or something, and it's shockingly good at that. But even still, it makes mistakes. Uh, and you have to I have to know enough to recognize, oh, this isn't right, or this isn't what I needed, or how does this fit into the bigger picture, stuff like that. So like I'm not actually that worried about that. um what I'm really thinking about is, what does this do to everyone now that we have created an oracle, this thing that just will answer whatever question you give it? And
Well,
I'm just not sure.
okay. Well, there's a few things. One is that I, I'm afraid that the hand-eye coordination of, say, an artist will start to kind of die off when you have something like this where you just type in, solve your creativity and whatever, you get the answer immediately. You stop working for it, and that will degrade the the artistic process as it's sort of evolved
Yeah.
over the last, however many years. I mean, it's already degraded in the last, few decades because of photography and then 3D modeling and all of that. I mean, when they invent the calculator, people start losing the ability to do complex math in their head or simple math, because they don't need to. You just type it in. And you could argue, well, who cares? You don't need to do that anymore. But it presents certain problems later on. And so for the entire art community, like, forget about the jobs. All right, forget about money, forget about all of that. The actual act of being an artist is at great risk, not only because you have this cheat code where you just type everything in and you get it.
Yeah.
And you can argue back and forth if it'll ever be as good as a human or whatever. Like, forget about that.
Right.
When you have this type of cheat code, you stop looking for answers, and you stop working on things. And so for me, it's like, it's so disappointing that I think we're just going to see sort of this death of artistic abilities, as I've already been witnessing over the last decade or so. The other thing is that um, the artists are a little bit ahead of everyone else. They're a little bit ahead of the programmers because it kind of
Right.
hit them first. And at first, I'm watching this AI art just slowly creep into the art community. And the art community previously was just such a wonderful, inspiring place to be. Everyone wants to help the other person. We're all on
Yeah.
this shared path of trying to better our skills and, as a human, and get better. But since this happened, at the beginning, I was actually really disappointed to see everyone say, like, "Oh, it's a cool new tool. Like, I'm so excited to use it." And then everyone just, starts adopting it. And I'm like, it's, be careful, because this is way more than a tool. So I was a little bit like, just sort of dumbfounded that all of them seem to be adopting this thing. But within the last week or two, there's been protests against it. Now it's like totally reversed. People are like, "Oh shit, this is
Yep.
not a tool. This is a replacement. This is insane." Because if you take like ArtStation, which was sort of this hub for artists to just, it was kind of like a portfolio site. Like, people have posted their art there, you share it, and whatever. It was a good sort of community. Well, ever since AI has started happening, people who have never done art before, who started creating these little AI pictures, started flooding ArtStation. And so they're just all over the place. It's just a complete flood of new art that the other artists don't give a shit about, and so now they're just drowned out in
Yeah.
this massive amount of new art that's just, sort of choked out all the original artists. So now they're protesting. It's completely split the community in half. It's just now it's such a polarizing thing
Right.
that I think this will also take place along the line with everyone else. When they realize that it's not just a threat to themselves, it changes the whole dynamic of basically everything. There's going to be this counter culture movement, sort of I don't know if it will be so much against it as it will be just the opposite direction. So watching this protest kind of happen, like if you go to ArtStation, almost all the images are no AI, no AI, stop AI, whatever, because they want more control over it. But I think there's going to be this movement sort of in the opposite direction of the AI stuff. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if it will be this sort of, hostile conflict, or if it will just be, more of a love for things that are human, like physical,
Right.
physical paintings, physical creations, like things that are human. I think there's going to be a real demand for that because already, if I look at an image, and I feel like this is sort of controversial, but if you look at an image and you think, wow, that's amazing, that's a beautiful piece of art, and then you realize that a computer did it, you instantly scroll, or I do. I just scroll away. I'm like, okay, I don't like it anymore. Like, because what I'm connecting to is the human story that I thought was connected to it, but now it's not connected to it, and it changes the experience of viewing it. And you could argue that all day long. Of, well, shouldn't have mattered. It's a piece of art, whatever. I don't care about your argument. But if
I would not argue that. I'm on your side on this.
But I think people look for human story, human connection in entertainment, whether it be music AI, which is, by the way, another thing that's happening. People look for that human connection, and I think people are going to get really sick of just this flood of fake shit everywhere. And so I'm curious about that counterculture movement. What is that going to look like? Will it be hostile? What's going to happen?
Right.
So it just started showing up in the art community. I'm curious to see it start showing up everywhere else.
Yeah, and so that's a very interesting piece of insight. You're right. I think you guys are a bit ahead of the rest of us, so it's kind of interesting to see how it's working for you. I do think it's going to be pretty different so my reaction when I was using this to write code for me and help me and everything, just like one, there is sort of that existential fear of, okay, am I going to have a job in 5 years or 10 years? Like, that is a genuine question. But then the other part of it is like that little bash script that I wrote. I don't want to spend 2 hours on the internet digging through
Right.
all these random posts trying to find this little detail that I need. The fact that it was able to just do that for me was actually incredible. And it let me just do that and get on to doing more interesting things. And there was a lot of things like that where I needed to write, I need some function. And I'm like, "Ugh, I know what I need to do. I don't care about it. I have to have it. And it's going to be hours of searching and figuring out, okay, what's the exact API? What does that call like? And it's not very well documented. Like, I don't want to do that. And having this thing just do it for me is
Right.
incredible. It's weird because then I have this function that I didn't write. So I mean, I get it, but I don't really get it. I didn't think through every little detail of it and have to agonize over it. So it's like, okay, plugging it in and it works. That's awesome. But I'm not, it's weird. It's like I assume an artist just kind of putting in something that an AI made. You're like, I didn't really make that. It looks cool. It fits, but I didn't make that. It's a very weird feeling. But for me,
Yeah.
as a programmer, the initial reaction was, this is great. This is really great. I'm trying to
Right.
debug something. And again, like I'm searching for information and it's tedious and annoying. And if it's just able to tell me, it's like, cool, done. Now I know. Now I can go on to the next thing. What's going to get
Right.
weird is if the scope of it starts to grow where it's able to write, entire programs or sections of programs and things like that, then I don't know anymore. Then it gets weird. Like, do you need me? Can you just have whoever wants this thing built, just start talking to an AI and like, where it can maintain your entire code base? We're not close to that yet. Like I haven't seen anything like that, but
But the thing from like the people you program for, are they going to be needed soon? Or will it be replacing them? Like, forget about whether or not it can code everything for you, or for
Yeah.
me, if it can complete a piece of art. Does it fulfill the need for that art or that programming in the first place? You know,
Yeah.
it, that's where it gets weird because, like, at the end of the day, I'm gonna place my bets on traditional art still being somewhat valuable in the future. I hope so.
Yeah.
And I think my job is pretty stable. I know that what I do at work cannot be replicated in the AI just yet because it is so complex and so
Right.
exact and
Right. Insane.
so quickly changing that it just doesn't make sense that it would take it over right now. But what is interesting is that I work for a design company. That design company houses artists. And previously, uh, if you had a design job to do and you needed a lot of art, you go to a design studio that has artists or you hire a bunch of different artists. Well, if that initial person that does the hiring can do the art that we do in house by themselves, they no longer need a design company,
Yeah.
you know? So it starts to completely shift the entire market of how the creative world makes sense. And so for you, even if it can't control or it can't write that complex of code, think about the people who hire you to write that code. If they can do a couple little chunks, put it together, and then it's complex, well then they don't need to hire anyone to do it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
or or I won't say anything, but you work for a creator. How long until that creator is old news and no one needs it because they have their own system that creates things for them? You know, it starts to get really weird. It may not come for your job in the exact way that you think.
Yeah.
It could come up from the back door, from a very different angle, and just totally, completely change the whole market. And I don't know. I
Well,
don't know. These are the kinds of things we just kind of have to wait and see.
yeah. Well,
Um,
here's one like slightly positive counterpoint to that. So for me, somebody pays me and I write software for them, and I'm, very, very limited in how much I can write. Like it takes me a long time to write a large piece of software. It's very complex. It requires tons of debugging and there's this feedback loop and everything, right? Like there's just a lot going on. And so I can spend months working on this thing and I get to some point where like, okay, it works. It can do this. It can do that. And on every project I've ever worked on, like if you made a list of all the things we wish it could do, it would be 1,000 developer years long. Everybody wants everything in there. They want, a
right.
full-blown social network to rival Facebook. They want, some elaborate shopping system, and like they want everything in there. And I can only do a tiny fraction of that because I'm limited. So if it winds up where I can do a lot more because I'm not getting stuck on these tedious things of, okay, I got to spend the next hour reading documentation, trying to figure out how to make this function work the way it's supposed to and call the right things and whatever. If that's just gone, where I can just say, write this for me, and this AI is able to say, yep, here you go. Here's the perfectly crafted function calls, and this is what the API looks like, then I can just move on to the next thing and think about, bigger
Yeah.
features. So it makes me way more productive. So in a sense, like, yeah, maybe that person could have done some of that themselves, but so can I. And if I know what I'm
Yeah.
doing and I understand everything and I'm able to like be much more effective even with the assistance of this AI tool, then I could just do a lot more. And so I'm still more valuable than this, project
Right.
manager, whoever it is trying to do that stuff. Now I totally take your point. Like what if, I'm building something for someone else and they have a persona and they have a product that they're putting out, and it's some type of content that they're selling. If something can generate that and do a really good job of it, then do any of us need to be there? And
Right.
I don't know. But like you said, people connect with humans. Like we want that, and that's never going to change. So, well, I mean, I don't think it'll change. So I think we're still looking for that. Like it might morph a lot. My thinking
Right.
is that at least in the near term, AI assistance is where most things are going to be. You're not going to lose your
Yeah.
job, but if you can get a piece of concept art done 10 times faster by using an AI tool, then like that's kind of your job to do it, right? Because they're paying you to, I mean, I don't know exactly how your job works, but
Yeah, yeah. No,
same for me. Like if I'm paid to, work on software for 10 hours, if I can do a lot more than that 10 hours by using the AI tools, then either I do that or they hire somebody else who is going to do that and it's going to get way more done than I would. So I
right,
think like we're looking at AI assistants across the board for virtually everything.
right. And I, I'm a lot less worried about losing my job directly, which was what I was initially worried
Yeah.
about. And there are tons of artists that are losing their jobs every day now because of this. But
Mm.
for me, it's not so much that you can replace me right now directly. Like something just fell in your room, which was
No, that was
scary.
like a
But
really loud firework or something, or gunshot.
oh,
I don't know. Maybe transformer exploding.
okay, we'll just ignore that.
One of those things.
Anyway,
Sorry.
I'm I'm much more afraid of losing my job in an indirect way,
Yeah.
where any benefit you can get by the AI, so can everyone else. And
Right.
I think that's something that people are kind of overlooking is that oh, we'll be so cool because we'll be able to use AI and we'll go so much faster than everybody else. Well,
Yeah.
everybody else has that too.
Well, yes, but okay, again, like for my job, I'm using it, but you know, again, there's flaws. Like it will give you wrong answers. Sometimes it will just outright lie to you. It's a really weird thing, but if it
Right.
isn't sure of an answer, it will make one up that sounds really compelling that's wrong. So I'm still having to take everything it does and look at it and think about it and then fit it together. And a lot of those things are, unless you had a lot of experience with programming and understanding what's going on, you wouldn't be able to do that. You would just get stuck and you would say, no, it doesn't work AI. And it's like, well, I don't know. And then you just can't go anywhere and that's it. Um, so yeah, of course it's possible it continues to evolve beyond that. But at least for now, like you would have to know what I know to be able to be effective with it. And if you didn't, you just wouldn't really get all that far. You would have to learn that stuff. So
Right.
I think that's still there, at least for now.
Right. So the only thing that becomes valuable is that brain that you've trained. Like
Yeah,
for me, if I'm looking at AI art, at first you're like, wow, that's incredible. And then you zoom in and you start thinking, oh, okay, that form doesn't make any sense. This
right,
doesn't add up. This doesn't work, whatever. Whereas a non-artist,
right.
you may or may not recognize that, but there was a book that just came out, an AI book that some non-artist made, and it's sold on Amazon and it's printed now, whatever, and there's a whole bunch of backlash about it, whatever. But if you look at the images of the kid's book, you're like, oh, like at first glance, you're like, oh, that's cute. And then you zoom
Hmm.
in, you're like, holy shit, this sucks. Like this doesn't make sense. That doesn't make
Yeah,
sense. Like it's so warped and twisted. And I don't think the guy that made that probably thought anything about it. He
right.
probably thought it looked incredible. But because he's not looking at the right stuff, he
Yeah,
just assumes it's great. And that's the type of stuff that's just going to be flooding the entire
right. But
internet right now. But
but that's what I mean
so
is that
yeah,
if you're somebody who does understand, like yes, you're using AI tools to assist you. I think you almost will have to be doing that,
right.
like
That
coming up
that's
soon.
what I'm saying. That's the only thing that
Right,
gives you a point
right.
because it's the only thing that's not AI. So anything you have outside of AI gives you a little bit more worth, a little bit more value.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
don't forget to learn stuff.
yeah.
Um,
Side note, well, not side note. Other point along these lines. Academia, like ChatGPT is a nuke that is about to go off over academia, and I don't think they know it yet. Maybe they're probably starting to figure this out. But so
yeah,
much of school is built around people writing things because up until this moment, it's been assumed that if you were going to write something, it had to be you. And if you plagiarize, like that's a major problem. There's some pretty good tools to figure that out where you can, see if somebody stole something. But ChatGPT is not plagiarizing, it's writing original content. And you can just straight up ask it to do whatever assignment you have, and it'll do it, and it'll do it really well. Or even short of that, you can just use it to assist you. You can write something and then paste it in there and say, hey, clean this up, make this make more sense. And it'll just go, cool. Academia has nothing for that. There's no plan. There's no tool out there that's going to fix that. And they don't know this yet.
That's what I'm saying. It's like going to implode
Yeah.
everything. It won't be instant, but
Yeah, but it's going to be happening soon.
yeah, yeah. This next year's gonna get real weird.
Yeah.
So, are there any? I don't know. Is there any sort of advice or anything? Like, I
Um
see. I feel like I don't know what I feel like.
well,
It's yeah.
so I don't really have advice yet. My thinking is this is happening way faster than I expected it to. Um, the generative uh, image stuff was surprising because it made this major quantum leap with these latent diffusion models. Going from Dolly 1 to Dolly 2 is like, oh my God, this is so much better. So that was crazy. But
Yeah.
my feeling was, okay, this happened in the image world, but that was surprising. I don't know that this is going to happen across the board, but now it's happened in the natural language processing world. And
With music as
yeah,
well.
music is maybe a little behind, but it's catching up quick. There's somebody figured out how to use stable diffusion, this AI image generator, to make music. And what they did was they took music and they wrote this little program to essentially encode the music into an image. And it doesn't look like sheet music. It's a little more machiney and garbly than that, but it's just this like square of, white and dark, and like the darker areas are notes, and it's got this like tonal map of the song represented in an image. And hopefully you can kind of picture that. And so they take all these generated song images, they feed it into stable diffusion and train it on that, and then you have it learn how to generate these images based off of a prompt or based off of an existing image, and it gets really good at creating these tonal maps, and then you can plug them back, like do the reverse, turn it back into music, and it sounds like music, and it's actually really good at it. And there's these examples of like a recording of a typewriter, or somebody typing on a keyboard, and it like slowly morphs that into jazz or something, and you just hear it as it's iterating, and it's or maybe it was electronic music, whatever. It's crazy. That's We were trying to wrap this up, and I'm just like going off on other stuff, but like just this is going so fast, so much faster than I expected. I thought we were way far away from where we're at right now. So it's going crazy. And it's totally possible that it will plateau within the next year or so. But it's hard to say that with a straight face now, like just seeing this in so many different
Just
areas.
watching, because you had Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, whatever, Dolly
Yeah.
for the art stuff, and you start reaching this plateau with just the program itself. With the
Right.
prompts, you put it in whatever, and you start to realize, okay, all of this is starting to look the same, whatever. But
Yeah.
then someone figures out a little hack or whatever, something to take it to the next level, and then the next person takes it to the next level, and then they add it into a different program, and then you have all of these offshoots of how to
Mhm.
use it. And so they created this little thing, this tool or whatever, and then other people just started combining it with other things, and then it's just kind of exploded into
Yeah.
all different areas, and it keeps going, it keeps evolving, and the actual program hasn't really been updated. It's just
Right.
people are finding different uses and different workarounds of some of the problems, and so on. So it's going to happen with the other
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
as far as a plateau, it might happen with the initial software or whatever, but the ways in which you use it are kind of endless.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So advice. Um, just emotionally prepare yourself for this, because it's really insane, and it's coming for everything. Like a while ago we could have said, okay, maybe it's just AI images, but nope, it's not. It's, natural language processing and music and everything else. Like this is coming. This is going to eat the world. I think there's some really positive things about it, but I mean, this feels like the moment when I first used the internet. And at the time, it's just so hard to even understand what it is. You try to explain it to someone else, and they're like, okay, so you can read, you know, some text that someone wrote somewhere else. Like, that doesn't really feel like that big of a deal. You're like, yeah, but but it is. And just think about what you could do. And it's not words, it's data, it's information traveling instantly from every person to every other person. And this is to me a similar thing. It's like all the stuff that people could do, now a machine can do it. Or it's approaching that very quickly. And on the one hand, it's like, okay, so it can draw cool images. Okay, so it can write an article for you. But no,
Oh,
no, it's a big deal.
yeah.
This
Think
is
about
earth
what that
breaking.
means.
Yeah. And I can't quite get my head around it. But okay, step one, start thinking about this and what this is going to mean, for you and your job. I think that's a primary concern for a lot of people. You're going to have to use this. If being a stubborn person and saying, nope, I'm doing it the old way, that you're gonna get ousted. Like, it won't work. This stuff is too powerful. It's like refusing to use a calculator when everybody else is like, no, you're just gonna get left behind. So like, you have to start making friends with this. And then the other part of it, the big part of it, which is suddenly human beings' relationship with information is going to change so dramatically. Not just our way of interfacing with it. Like I said, I can just ask this thing a question, it gives me an answer, which is insane. But also the generation of information. It's no longer, the problem of recent times has been any person out there can say what they want. They don't have to know what they're talking about, and it gets really hard to tell, who's right and wrong, or who is, has any clue. Now it's not even that. We're moving well beyond that. It's that you can create information that sounds very compelling. It's not even from a person. You can just generate this stuff, images, videos, text, all of this. So like, the information in the world is just going to grow by orders of magnitude potentially. And so it's like, not just the lens that we look at it, but also the information out there is going to be different. And I'm really struggling to understand where we go from here, like what this will look like in 10 years, even assuming AI doesn't continue to progress, which of course it will. So I really don't know, but start thinking about it, because this is a big deal. This is a really
I
big deal.
have I had to really have to stop thinking about it because you know
Yeah.
people, when the first AI art stuff started happening and people start getting worried, for me it wasn't so much about losing your job. The fear for me, or like the deep sickly feeling from all this AI stuff, it's not about losing my job. Like, forget about that. It's about this loss of art community, and this, you're just
Yeah.
losing so much because it's like, the art of math in your head. Well, someone comes along and says, nope, screw you, I got this fun little thing, you know and if that was your love in life, is doing math in your head, well, suddenly there's no demand for it. There's no, like,
Hmm.
you're out. Like, your love is gone. Like, you're done with that. And in order to progress in society, you have to have that calculator, whatever. You have to have that cheat code, even though it goes against everything that you love so much. And so
Yeah.
for me, the art, it has just felt like art death. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, it's just because of this flood of new images, it lowers like everyone's, I don't know, it just pollutes the whole planet, the art on the planet. It's just completely polluted, and I I don't know, and it's not going anywhere. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And some people love it. Like, some people are all about it, but to me it's like the things that I love about art are now just, I don't know, just being demolished left and right. And I mean, communities, not just the art itself. It's like the whole attitude towards art, like everything is just being wiped out. So I've had to kind of stop thinking about it, and just
Yeah.
because it's so crushing and overwhelming. So the thing I'm sort of putting my hope in is that I don't want, I don't know what that counterculture movement's going to sort of look like, but I am putting my faith in humanity that they will still treasure human made things. That's my hope.
I think
Uh,
that they will. I think you're right.
until we're half cyborg, half,
Maybe.
or,
But
or
again,
cyborg is.
we can't you
I
can't
know
think
that's
too
too
far,
far.
because it's too much. It's too
But is
insane.
it too far?
Well, I don't know, but like, just I can't handle
Yeah, I know.
thinking
I know.
20 years from now. I'm thinking like 2 years from now.
Right. But I will say it for anyone else who this, if you're looking at this and watching it and being afraid to lose your job or lose things. I've also felt like that. And I've had to just kind of stop thinking about it and start, I don't know, thinking about like, hopefully 5 years from now, humans will still want to be humans, in some way. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's not quite the same for me because I'm not in the art world, but I get it. Like there is something that just feels disgusting about it. It
Yeah.
feels like somebody took all the art in the world and put it in a giant pile and then just like dissolved it all with Drano, and then it's now just oozing out of every single Discord server and forum and
Yep.
everything. Like you can't move without this stuff just coming at you, and it's like this weird blended thing, and something about it is it feels gross. Like it really does feel gross. And even with the Chat GPT thing, like there's something about that too where you're like, this is insane and it's incredible and
Yeah.
I can't believe this, but also it's kind of gross. It's hard to, is there something about it being so like watered down and blended, and it loses
Yeah.
so much. It's weird and it's gross. But it's happening right now and it's very new, and so the reaction to it is like let's see where we're at in a year. Like you
Yeah.
said, I mean, already you look on ArtStation and it's nothing but red circles of protests and things like it. People are trying to figure this out, and there's this very strong reaction to, hey, we don't want this like this. So the world is going to have to come up
Right.
with a way of dealing with it one way or another, and hopefully hopefully we can wind up in a place where it helps us. It doesn't destroy us. We'll
Sure.
have to see.
Because we're great at things like this.
Right.
Humans are
We're
just
always
amazing.
rational and able to coordinate on a global scale. When have we failed at that? We'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, just like there's too many unknowns. It just has to be a wait
Yeah.
and see thing, and
Yeah.
we're gonna see it soon. So
Okay, I have nothing else to add.
yeah, yeah, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Okay, fair enough. Neither do I. Thank you for talking through this with me, though. I feel like I needed it for me. Maybe I haven't had as many AI conversations as you have, but
No, me too. Me too. I don't like
it's
talking about it, but I keep thinking about it, so it helps
as well.
Yeah.
All right. Good luck, everybody. Good luck in your jobs and your life trying to survive the AI tsunami that is rapidly approaching. Thanks for listening. We love all the support that we've gotten this past year and continue to get. Thank you so much. Remember, you can do all the random YouTube stuff on YouTube. We would love any kind of review or positive feedback on podcast platforms. We really love that. Please email us or comment on YouTube or talk to us in our Discord. Thank you so much. See you next week.